diversity just for diversity's sake doesn't always produce that sort of positive outcome. You have to have institutional and departmental support. You need to have things in place that really facilitate that sense of belonging. Because as you know, if you don't have that sense of belonging, just with your research and your experience, yeah, that attrition rate, I should say, actually increases dramatically. So, again, this is only one part of the equation, just in terms of getting people in the door, but it's about keeping them here and having them feel like they belong in a space that they now inhabit.
Welcome to DEI Career Conversations, brought to you by the DEI Career Center, where we help current and aspiring DEI professionals gain clarity and confidence as job seekers who want to make a real impact. I'm the DEI career coach, Andrea G. Tatum. In this episode, I had an opportunity to speak with Julian Culver. He is the Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Research Associate at Brown University. In this conversation, we chatted about the importance of curiosity when it comes to exploring DEI data and digging into your research. Plus, he shared how interpersonal skills can be used to help drive your DEI work forward. If you're thinking about how you can make an impact in DEI, be sure that you have liked and subscribed to this channel. Be sure to listen all the way to the end so that we can share with you all of our thoughts and tidbits, and you can learn more about how you can be a part of the DEI Career Center. All right, let's get into it. Hi, Julian. Welcome to DEI Career Conversations. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Yeah, thank you so much, Andrea. I'm just happy to be here and looking forward to a great conversation.
Same. I mean, when we first met and we got a chance to chat, I was so excited to be able to hopefully share a little bit more of your background, your journey, and the work that you do. I find your
Yeah.
role, you're at Brown University and you are the DEI Research Associate. So that's a lot of words, it's a lot of title. So tell me a little bit about like
Yeah.
what is your job? What is the day in the life for you, Julian?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so technically, my title is a postdoctoral, excuse me, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion Postdoctoral Research Associate. But yeah, I guess colloquially, around campus, some people do refer to me as just a DEIB, researcher, not just DEIB researcher, but a DEIB researcher that, does a lot of work around DEI, obviously, in terms of the programs and initiatives that I help develop and implement. Not just in the Department of Sociology where I'm appointed, but certainly on behalf of the Provost Office in terms of, helping other departments get up to speed on their DEI initiatives and consulting with them in terms of the things that they face challenges with around DEI. I would say those are some of the main things I typically work on. And then in terms of the actual research component to it, this includes, for example, analyzing departmental climate, social climate, asking certain faculty and students about their sense of belonging within the department and at the university. These are really key things that I really take pride in doing on campus. And, I can see in some sense how, my efforts have paid off across time since I've been here, since fall 2022, actually.
Yeah. Oh man. Okay. So I'd love to know, right? Especially for those of us who are not in academia, or may not
Mhm.
have as much of an understanding. Can you talk to us a little bit about your research and how is it used on campus to actually create strategies? I heard you say not just like for your department, but you're looking at this more broadly as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and so kind of like we discussed a little bit off screen. I have my scholarly work that I've basically continued since I was a graduate student at Rice University, and then I have the research that I do that's more related to just Brown University. But certainly these things are incongruent. So with my scholarly work, my training as a sociologist is in quantitative research methods, survey research, thinking through about social inequality, race and racism. And in particular, I also focus on racial attitudes. And these things are really important in terms of understanding why people think about things the way they do and how larger social forces shape behaviors and attitudes related to those things. And so for me, I'm taking that expertise, or I took that expertise from Rice to Brown to sort of enhance DEI initiatives and programs that we have on campus. And in particular, this was sort of something initially that I worked on in the Department of Sociology. And as I mentioned before, this has been expanded in scope to the work I do on behalf of the Provost's office. And so, you asked about how how the research I use or conduct, gets implemented in terms of the DEI work I do now. Well, with my understanding about organizations and structures and how it plays a pivotal role in, shaping the sense of belonging and inclusion, and not just in terms of diversity, these things are incredibly important because it gives me sort of a macro understanding about the big picture with certain programs and initiatives that helps me sort of refine my efforts around DEI programs and initiatives that are going to actually make a substantial impact and remain long term, not just for the time that I'm here, but something that's more long lasting, right? Not just a simple smaller program, which are meaningful in particular ways, but basically I'm interested in some of the bigger picture ideas, right? It isn't just a matter of reaching a certain quota and then calling it a day. This is a process, right? And if the process is going to work, there needs to be a system in place that reproduces and maintains that process, right? And so I'm thinking about my work along the lines of like what I call like the four big R's, which I've seen in some research that I've studied across time with organizational industrial psychology in terms of representation, recruitment, retention, and the return on investment. So having those metrics in place has really sort of guided my research that I do here at Brown University. So I know that's kind of a long-winded answer, but that's basically the focus of my
No,
work.
I love that, and I just wanna call out a couple of key things that I heard and tell me if I misunderstood, but one, it's not as if you do this research or you collect this data and it's a one and done. I'm hearing that it's an
Right.
iterative process. Is that correct?
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so, I think it's also important for people to understand, as I mentioned, it's not just you get diversity, quote unquote, and that's it, right? This really is a process. And because, attitudes are related to, larger social structures and processes that happen outside of the institution, it makes DEI work fresh, but also challenging because we know that it's linked to larger things that are happening outside of the department and university. So, with that being said, that means we always have to sort of be up on our game, so to speak, in terms of what we do, how we approach it, the process and plans and programs and initiatives that we implement, just because these things are always dynamic and they're always changing in particular ways. So, yeah, this is an iterative process. There's no end to it, so to speak.
Yeah, and so when you think about taking that and, that data and really distilling it down, I've heard you mention programs,
Hmm.
and I always talk about strategies, and
Yeah.
those are very broad strokes words, so
Right.
if you
Right.
could break it down to me, like you say, "Okay, I've got this research, we've got this data." I know Brown actually has some really amazing dashboards and data that's
Hmm.
shared,
Right.
um, but how do you take that knowing what you just said, which is it is
Right.
iterative, it is based on more than sometimes what's just happening in the policies and on campus. How do you take those insights, quantitative, qualitative data, and say,
Right.
this is the strategy? These are the actionable things that we should be looking at because there's so much when you think about data
Right.
that you could kind of try to say like, "What do I do with this? What do I do with this?" How do you as
Right.
Julian, as also an advisor to other say
Right.
like, "This is important. This is an insight that we need to do something about."
Initially, a department reached out to me about some of their recruitment strategies, and I began with looking at the data of the current composition of their PhD students in their department, and I found that 60% of their students in that PhD program were from an international background, and thus 40% were from the United States. Again, there's nothing inherently wrong with that, but it does signal something about possibility of like some kind of informal pipeline or informal recruitment strategies behind the scene that are attracting so many international students relative to students from the United States. So I took that And then I followed up in terms of looking at data from the application pool. And lo and behold, across, I think, like a 10-year span, most of the applications comprised were from international students, I should say. If I understand correctly, or if I remember correctly, this was about 65 to 70% of applications across that 10-year period were from international students. That can't be ignored. There's nothing coincidental about that, right? And so I showed that to some of the departmental leaders that that sought my sort of expertise and consultation about this. And I began to ask them questions, and then I decided, like, hey, maybe we just need to have some sort of informal, or not informal, but sort of in-depth sort of interviews or understanding about what are the processes in place that are attracting so many international applications. And this really posited some interesting responses, some of which I can't
Yeah.
I can't get into here, unfortunately. But nonetheless, this was about them coming to an understanding that, okay, this is about some of the face-to-face contact we're making with universities outside of the U.S. that attracts people to Brown and in this particular department. So for them, they didn't see that because they were doing research in different countries and collaborating on research with different professors in those countries, they didn't necessarily see that as like a recruitment strategy. But again, it's that face-to-face contact that I had to remind them, not just face-to-face contact with professors, but the students that are their research assistants in those countries, that really make the difference in terms of attracting students, right? From the international background. And so I sort of generalized, or kind of thought of like strategic ways. Well, if these processes are working in this context, why couldn't this work at, for example, an HBCU or an HSI or any sort of minority serving institution? If you're struggling with recruiting, what we call HUG students, historically underrepresented students, or students from historically underrepresented groups in higher education, well, we have to actually go to where they are first to kind of attract them to Brown and let them know, like, hey, this is a space that we're trying to change, and we're trying to offer more opportunities to people who are interested in some of the research we're doing here. So it seems like an easy answer just to go to the place and show up and do the research and then leave. But nonetheless, again, it's about that face-to-face contact. And this other component that really can't be undersold is the building relationships with people is essential to actually not just not just essential in terms of just a life skill, but in terms of actually enhancing your recruitment efforts, particularly around historically underrepresented students. Again, building those relationships goes a long way. And so that's kind of an example where I analyzed the sort of administrative data showing their composition of the students in that PhD program, delved a little bit deeper into the application pool demographic data across a 10-year span. And then I followed up qualitatively with in-depth interviews of professors who conduct research internationally. And that sort of led me to tailor my efforts and strategies around, enhancing their recruitment efforts and some things they might do going forward. And to my understanding, those things have actually paid off quite well over the past year. So yeah, the thing is, if I would have just stopped at like the analyzing the application pool data and them saying, hey, we don't have a pipeline in place, I don't know what you're talking about. Well, okay, well, I guess my work is done. And then the problem, quote unquote, doesn't get solved. But nonetheless, always being curious, having that research background, especially as a trained sociologist, really compelled me to look deeper and beyond just the quantitative data, and to get more depth qualitatively as to why that is. And then that informed the strategies I recommended they use.
Julian, this was so good because literally yesterday I was speaking with one of my clients, and this is why I love doing
Mhm.
this series, because you're
Yeah.
in higher ed, your background's in research. Listen, that's not my background, but I love data, I love understanding, and the word that you said is what I try to instill in so many leaders who say, like, "Hey, we're trying to figure out this DEI thing." I'm like, "But are you being curious?" It's one thing to say, like, "We're
Right.
trying to figure it out," but what are you basing that trying to figure it out on? And
Right.
that's
Right.
where having that quantitative and then qualitative data comes in, but not just saying, "Well, we asked a question, we got an answer." You got to dig deeper, folks. Dig deeper, ask more questions. Like, I say this in one of my trainings, I'm like, "Ask a question, ask another question, and then ask yet
Mhm.
another question about the same question. Like,
Right.
let's go down into some levels here because it's seldom just what's on the surface. And to your
Correct.
point, right? And so why I
Yeah.
love what you said was it's not that it was a problem, but you're like, what's going on? What is the cause?
Right.
how is this happening? Right. And so in my conversation with my client, they're not quite at a point where they're actively doing a ton of recruiting. They're in the technology space, but they know they're about to start ramping back up. And I said, "Well, what's your strategy for your ramping back up of hiring and ensuring that if you know that you're at this number of like let's say it's 60 something percent similar to what you're talking about of white men in sales or white men in technical roles, it's not that that's a problem, but how do we make sure that we are finding ways to open the opportunities so that we can
Right.
level it out, even it up a little bit, like where are we going for women? And it's not about like, hey, I'm going after these women, but it's like, where do you show up? Where do
Right.
people hear your voice? And
Right.
this is why conferences and webinars and all
Right.
these things are so important because when you think about an employer's brand, the people within your company are your biggest recruiting tool.
Right. Yeah, I really can't endorse that statement enough. I mean, for me, it's really interesting because when I was a student at Rice, it's like I read the research or I read the research. I'm hearing other people talk about it and conducting the research, but then when it's time to take that research and put it into practice, so to speak, and it works, it's kind of like this eerie feeling. It's like, wow, okay, this this actually has some attraction to it. So yeah, again, the face-to-face contact, I really can't speak about that enough. Again, just not just simply reaching out via email, which is important. I'm not undermining that at all, but I think there's something extra about showing up in person and building that relationship with people that is essential for recruiting in general, but especially recruiting people from very diverse backgrounds too. I think that goes a long way. And then, if I may, there's also another component too. It's like, you know, diversifying your PhD program population, and this really probably cuts across not just academia, but across different sectors as well. It's like it's important to diversify it because we know that diversity is good for a plethora of outcomes, but it's also about what you do after they arrived at your organization or your department too, right? Diversity just for diversity's sake doesn't always produce that sort of positive outcome. You have to have institutional and departmental support. You need to have things in place that really facilitate that sense of belonging, because as you know, if you don't have that sense of belonging, just with your research and your experience, yeah, that attrition rate, I should say, actually increases dramatically. So, again, this is only one part of the equation, just in terms of getting people in the door, but it's about keeping them here and having them feel like they belong in a space that they now inhabit.
I found research that the Kapoor Center, which is here in California, shout out to
Mhm.
the Kapoor Center in Oakland. They did some research back in, I think it was like 2016, 2017, and it was called like the Tech Levers Study. And it was one of the first things I can kind of remember reading for myself where I was just like, this is so clear to me about why diversity isn't just about attracting, but it's about retaining and developing. And when I read the statements from the research that said so many people, especially people of color, were leaving tech and telling the reasons why, and it was because those that infrastructure wasn't there to support them. It was like, "You
Right.
brought us here, but, like, you don't love us. You did it for show." So, I mean, we could go on and on and on about that part of the
Yeah.
conversation,
Yeah.
but I
Right.
wanna
Right.
understand a little bit more, especially because I think research and data analysis is something that's often misunderstood, right? You said something pretty early on, which
Right.
was like, it's not just about quotas, it's not about this. So, um, as you came into this role, I heard you say, right, you came from more scholarly research. Talk to me about what made you want to be in this position. And in addition to your analytical skills, what skills did you gain along the way that support you in the role you're in now?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. Yeah, because there's not really like a linear path that led me specifically to this role. I think there was a lot of bumps along the road. There was a lot of challenging times, many opportunities for me to exercise resilience when I didn't have a choice. So it was a long journey, so to speak. So throughout my time at Rice, my 6 years in the Department of Sociology, earning my PhD, I always wanted to be a professor. It's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be trained as like an independent scholar, producing research and teaching as well at a university. And towards the end of my fifth year, when I'm on the academic job market, some of those opportunities came around. I was interviewing. I did the job market interviews, did the teaching sort of exercise for departments. I did the research talks. I did those things because I thought at that time that is really what I wanted to do. But across time, at least within that last year, as I'm working on my dissertation, something kept gnawing at me, and this is more of, I guess, a personal point that I still have to process. But nonetheless, something just felt as if I was being tugged in a different direction, so to speak. Um, Despite all my training to be a professor, and so when those opportunities finally arrived for me to either sign the contract at this location or at this school versus signing at another one, I don't know, just something intrinsically never really felt at ease with that. And that has nothing to do with the schools, the departments, or anywhere else. This was something that was more internal to me about where I saw my career trajectory and, sort of how I envisioned my life at that point. So yeah, I had the contracts in hand. All I had to do was sign, or pick a department and sign, and then show up that fall. But I didn't, obviously, and so now I'm arriving here at Brown. And so when I first saw this opportunity on, I forget exactly where I saw the job listing at, but nonetheless, I found it interesting because obviously Brown has a reputation for being a very a rigorous school in terms of the research that's produced and the teaching that's being done. Faculty members in the Department of Sociology I was already familiar with, and in particular, my supervisor, Professor Sandra Barnes, somebody I have a lot of respect for even before I joined Brown, made this a really attractive option for me. And so when I began to read the job and I saw that I can simply, not simply, but basically do the research that I'm really interested in, while also having time to continue to do the sort of scholarly research I was doing on the side, quote unquote, even though they're incongruents. I kind of leapt at that idea because it actually gave me more time to sort of think through what it is I actually want to do and to get some experience that I didn't have. It's like, again, I'm reading about research on social inequality, racism, identity, sense of belonging. I'm reading about those things, but not necessarily explicitly in a DEI context, right? And so this role, obviously, it allows me to sort of gain those skills and gain those insights, and allows me to sort of put what I've learned in the classroom into practice in sort of a real life setting, so to speak. And so that was an opportunity I just didn't want to pass up, and I was so curious about it that I just had to take, the opportunity to really grab a hold of it. So I'm really paraphrasing the story, actually. I mean, I know we don't have much time
No,
to say
go into
everything, but
detail. It's all
nonetheless, I
right.
mean, this really took a lot of time to just contemplate and be introspective again about what it is I wanted to do. I sought the advice of people closest to me and people I trust. Even went to therapy to kind of work things out, just to see, like, am I in my own head about this? And certainly, after all of that, long story short, I do feel I made the right decision. And, in a very honest way, it's paid dividends professionally, but also personally as well. So that was sort of the confirmation for me that, I did make the right choice in the sort of long run.
And everything that you said is exactly why I created this DEI Career Center. It's because there's so many people who are struggling with making those decisions of what's next for me, whether it's, kind of like you said, coming out of maybe a PhD program or pivoting from, law into DEI, or hitting that point
Right,
in your
right,
life where you're just like, I've maybe been doing this thing for a long time, and there's something else. There's a
right,
passion, there's a purpose that I'm
right.
seeking out and I don't feel fulfilled. And so when I started the DEI Career Center, I very much came in with the hope that I could be a coach, an advocate for helping people to work through those things. So, I mean, I am not a
Right.
therapist. But I am a huge advocate for therapy. I am a huge advocate for
Yeah.
having someone be a thought partner in making those decisions. But what I really love that you said about it, not just about paying dividends, financially and professionally, but also just personally. And that's my approach as a
Right.
coach is the work that you're going to do impacts all aspects of your life.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you hit it right on the head. Yeah, I mean, the work is meaningful to me too, and it's not to say that publishing research wasn't meaningful, but like I mentioned, there was something that was just pulling me in a different direction, and for me, just the kind of person I am, I wanted something that was a bit more hands-on, something to where I could see if it's not an immediate impact, that I can actually see, in some tangible way, the sort of fruits of my labor, so to speak, beyond just publishing a paper, getting a citation. Which again, I'm not undermining that at all, but it's just something that I didn't feel resonated with me enough for me to actually do a career in that sort of domain. And then I also had to think about, okay, if I am going to pursue that line of work, would I actually be doing a disservice to the university and the students I mentor and teach if my heart is not fully in it? So I had to really come to terms with that and sort of understand that, look, this is the tough, mature decision that I have to make, even if I'm leaning into some uncertainty here, and that's okay. Life isn't life always isn't going to provide you this clear picture as to what you're supposed to do next. And the thing is, if I can also add this too, as I mentioned, like my goal was to be a professor, and I had that aspiration since about 2000, like 2013, 2012 or 13. Now that I actually remember, and so getting all the way to 2021, 2022, and thinking that, okay, I had this opportunity, but now I don't want it in the way that I thought I did. This really actually ushered in sort of an identity crisis that I wasn't even fully cognizant of at that time, because like for actually most of my life I've been a student in some capacity, whether that's obviously going back to kindergarten all the way through graduate school. It's like, okay, what does life look like outside of being a student? And I had to really come to terms with that again, about how do I see myself career wise, personally, professionally, and where do we actually go next? And so, again, I sought out the help of people I trust in therapy. And yeah, I'm just thankful that, ultimately I feel like I made the right choice for various reasons, particularly in the meaningful work that I'm doing here at Brown, because I see tangibly that it's actually helping departments and students and even faculty members as well. Even if there are some challenges, which there are daily, nonetheless, I never feel, ironically, I haven't felt drained by the work yet. It's always a new set of challenges that, I feel very, interested in taking on, so to speak. So yeah, so that's kind of how I got to this role I'm in
No,
now.
I love your journey. Thank you so much for sharing that in that detail. That's amazing. And so I'll kind of squeeze. I had two questions, but in kind of
Hmm.
where that second part of the question was really thinking about skills beyond just like
Yeah.
the analytical part that you gained through your career as a student, that you just said, but
Right.
like for
Mhm.
yourself, or even if you were mentoring or talking to someone who was like, "Hey, Julian, like I'm really what you're doing sounds fascinating." What other skills besides being able to look at that data do you find necessary to be able to be successful in the work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, aside from like the analytical work, or the analytical skills, I would say, I'm going to go back to building relationships. Your interpersonal skills are going to take you places where likely your analytical skills are not going to be able to take you, if I'm just being completely honest. I can't foresee doing this work if you're not comfortable or able to build relationships with people from not just diverse experiences, but across different positions within the organization that you're in. And so for me, those things have been sort of invaluable to helping people understand the nature of DEI work, what it is not. why it's important, how it can benefit their department, even the institutionally sort of broadly defined. I really can't talk about that enough, right? Because and again, that sort of is the nature of the work that we're doing. DEI really is to me about building relationships and
Absolutely.
enhancing those, yeah, and enhancing those relationships too. So and thankfully those are things that people can develop across time. I mean, obviously I didn't just arrive here with everything figured out. I mean, I had to do training, I had to connect with people and network and build my skill set around those things too. But nonetheless, I see that this is something that has helped me tremendously. Other than building relationships and the sharpening interpersonal skills across time, I would go back to what I mentioned earlier in the conversation about having that curiosity and not necessarily just taking things at face value. Thankfully, my training as a sociologist has worked wonders in terms of building that curiosity across time, right? So, I mean, the example I gave earlier about the international students within that department, that's just one example. But it actually helps me see beyond that, just sort of broadly thinking about these things. It's like, okay, well, Brown University is a PWI or primary white institution. Well, why is that? Again, these things are not coincidental. There's something that has happened across time historically that has led to the composition of faculty, staff, and students being a majority of one racial and ethnic background versus the others, right? And so that sort of allows me to explore the things about Rhode Island specifically. What role does the state actually play in shaping the demographic of the institution? Things about processes of discrimination, institutional discrimination, things about intergroup contact, or why is it that certain people tend to get along with others versus a different group that are outside of that experience. So, in other words, all that is just to say is that the sense of curiosity is something that's just is necessary for me to actually be the bit to for me to be the best at the work that I'm doing here at Brown. Excuse me. And then I guess if another thing, if it matters, at Rice, I was able to get a lot of teaching experience in. And what was so beneficial about that at that time, but certainly going forward, is it actually helped me with public speaking, one, but then also it helped me sort of think about how do I best manage competing interest
Mm,
and different competing personalities,
mm,
right? Because this was a large classroom that I taught. It was actually an introduction to sociology course, and I think there was about like 80 students at one time in that class, and that was a lot of students, right? Like there isn't just it's challenging enough when you have a small classroom, but some of those challenges are amplified with a larger classroom. And so, again, managing those personalities and competing interests has given me sort of a framework moving forward for how to do it at a sort of a wider scope within Brown University, but also in terms of consulting with certain departments about, well, they have this interest, they may not see the merit in DEI work, but making the case as to why that is and why it's important for them going forward, not just in sort of a Pollyannish way, but actually having a tangible impact on the research, the grant money that you're bringing in, and the overall academic experience at Brown University can be improved through the efforts of DEI. So yeah, I would say some of those skills are just invaluable to me that I've basically built across time, but certainly that I brought with me here at Brown.
yeah, I mean, all of those are amazing skills. And you hit the nail on the head. Like as a DEI person, those interpersonal skills, those abilities to build relationships, to
Yeah,
also understand where people are coming from and deal with
right,
those
right,
differences, that's every day. That is the
right,
work. Even if you're
right,
not in
right,
a setting in a higher ed setting, if you're in a more corporate or nonprofit or whatever that may be, the reality is most people are there. They signed up to do that job. I'm here to do this work. Everything else feels extra.
right,
And so I love it just every time. It never fails. They're like, we
right,
time and the way we've always done it are like the two biggest things that I'm just like constantly in conflict with. But I love what you just said.
right,
It's making it applicable to people in a way that they understand and that they see
right,
how it benefits them regardless of their own background. Because when you start talking about
right.
grant money, oh. Oh, okay, I can hear that. I
Right.
can tell me more all of a sudden, and I
Right.
talk about that. It's like you
Right.
have to appeal to the people in a way that resonates with them. And that's just human nature. Human nature just says like
Right.
otherwise change is hard and difficult and you don't know, it takes too much effort to do it. So I love everything that you just talked about. This was such a great conversation, Julian. I appreciate all the insights that you have shared with us today.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Andrea. I'm just happy to be here and learn more from the work that you're doing, which I appreciate very much. And yeah, this was great. I actually feel like this was sort of therapeutic in in a way for me. So yeah, I just enjoyed it all. Thank you so much.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of DEI Career Conversations. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so that you know as soon as new episodes are live. Also, if you'd like to learn more about our brand new program, be sure to check out the links below or visit DEIcareer.com and look at our courses. This new course is so exciting because not only are we going to help support you as a job seeker thinking about pivoting your passion into a career into DEI, but we're also going to make sure that you have the tools and resources you need in order to learn how to create data-informed strategies for DEI, how to create metrics, how to make sure that you know how to do the work of DEI by getting unprecedented insights from DEI professionals who are doing this work day in and day out. So I'm so excited about it. I hope that you'll join us. We have monthly community connection calls for anyone who's a part of the program, and you can learn more about it all at DEIcareer.com.